To the east of Berlin, on both sides of the German-Polish border, lies the Oder-Warta region. Where the rivers Warta and Oder converge, there is a fascinating natural and cultural landscape that has been designed and used by humans for centuries. The Order of the St. John is a religious knightly order which for more than 700 years has been closely linked to the region. The work of the Knights of St. John affected the development of the region and its people to this day. Numerous traces of this history can be found in buildings such as churches and castles, in city coats of arms, or in the names of places, schools, folk festivals, and charitable aid institutions such as the St. John Accident Assistance. The history of the Order of St. John begins in Jerusalem around the middle of the 11th century. This was the time when many Christians made pilgrimage to the Holy Land where, according to their faith, Jesus Christ once lived, taught, and suffered. There, the lay brotherhood established the Order of St. John of the Hospital of Jerusalem, a hospital to help sick pilgrims and crusaders. To this day, this care for the needy is the main task of the Order of Knights, whose symbol is the 8-pointed St. John's cross. Around the same time as the Order of St. John, other Christian orders of knights were founded with similar tasks, for example, the Templar Order in Jerusalem and the German Order in Acre. In 1312, the Templar Order was officially dissolved by Pope Clement V, and the Order of St. John received extensive possessions of the Templars in Europe, also in the Oder-Warta region in the Brandenburg-Liebes area. They founded villages, set up agricultural estates, and built churches, for example in Neuentempel, Marxdorf, or Lietzen.
Die Johanniter waren verhandlungsmäßig oder im Verhältnis
The
zum
Knights of St.
Papst
John
in
were
der
always
Zeit
more
immer
skillful
etwas
in their
geschickter.
negotiations
Sie konnten weiter
and in their
bestehen
relations
und
with
nicht
the
nur das,
Pope at the
sondern sie
time.
haben
They were
die
able
Templer
to
zu einem
survive.
wesentlichen
Not
Teil
only that, but they
beerbt.
inherited a
Und das
substantial
bezieht
part of the
sich nicht
Templars.
zuletzt auf das
And this
Gebiet, in
applies
dem wir
not
uns hier
least to the
befinden.
area in which we are
Gerade
here.
hier
It is precisely here that the
haben die
Knights of
Johanniter
St. John
eine ganze Reihe
took over a whole
von
series of
Konventen, das
communities.
heißt also Anteile des Großgrundbesitzes hier übernommen.
The Order of St. John also owned towns and lands in the region, which they managed. By taking over about a third of the former Templar possessions, the Knights of St. John were able to gain further influence. For the first time, the Balje van der Marken, the bailiwick of Brandenburg, was mentioned in documents. The Grand Master and Knights of the bailiwick focused above all on the sustainable management of large estates. In this way, they differed fundamentally from the main order, who defended themselves in the Mediterranean against the expansion of the Ottoman Empire since the fall of Acre in 1291, most recently in Malta since 1530. The knights there remained Catholic and henceforth called themselves Maltese. As early as 1382, the Heimbacher settlement was concluded, which granted the bailiwick of Brandenburg a far-reaching self-determination outside the main order. In 1538, the bailiwick also converted to the Protestant faith, in contrast to the Catholic main order. The center of the bailiwick of Brandenburg and the seat of the Grand Master became Sonnenburg, now Polish Slansk, owned by the order since 1427. There, the Knights of St. John were knighted. Then you get a light contact on the shoulder with a large sword. This is done in a ceremony that took place in Sonnenburg Castle until the end of World War II. Other important locations of the Order of St. John in the Oder-Warta region were Friedland, Silenzig, Wagow, Schwebus, and Lietzen. There were built castles, manors, administrative seats, and churches. The 30 Years' War left great devastation and misery in Brandenburg. To revive the economy, Elector Friedrich Wilhelm brought Dutch builders and experienced administrators to the country. Among them was the young but already world-experienced Prince Johann Moritz von Nassau-Siegen, who became a decisive promoter of Brandenburg culture and science. Johann Moritz moved from Hague to Sonnenburg and began reorganization and reconstruction. Always accompanied by architects, civil servants, scientists, and artists, he created effective administrative structures and had desolate peasant posts filed. In addition, from 1668, he had the Sonnenburg Palace redesigned, which was to become the seat of the Lords of the Order of St. John in the bailiwick of Brandenburg for several centuries. The Palace of Sonnenburg was destroyed and rebuilt several times before reaching its architectural peak in 1668 under Johann Moritz von Nassau-Siegen in the style of the Dutch Baroque. The shape and execution of the palace was very similar to the Maurits house in The Hague, which was also built earlier by Johann Moritz von Nassau-Siegen and whose former residence was another. We're talking about the 17th century, so if you look at it more closely, you'll see shells and fruits, partly pomegranates. You have to imagine the people have lived a stream in thatched houses. Fish from the water were eaten and caught here. That's all they knew. And Johann Moritz von Nassau came with fruits from Brazil and decorated the facade with them. But that's basically the only piece of jewelry. It was important to him that it was a simple house, the house of a Protestant knightly order, and he was very well versed in Dutch architecture at the time, which was influenced by northern Italy by Platonism, Palladianism, and which was manifested there in a particularly simple form.
Norditalien vom Palladianismus geprägt war und die sich in einer besonders schlichten Form dort dann schon manifestierte. Er war mit den Architekten Jakob von Campen beispielsweise bekannt.
The Maurits House is today the most beautiful museum in Hague and houses the best Dutch paintings from the time of Rembrandt and Vermeer. Unfortunately, the Order's palace in Sonnenburg was denied such lasting splendor. Although Sonnenburg Castle survived the Second World War almost intact, it completely burned down in 1975. In the course of the project, intensive efforts have been made to save the castle from the final decay. That is, it will take place and it will then be possible to visit some of the rooms. As for example, also the Knights' Hall, which occupied the largest place in the castle. The Grand Master in the Knights met regularly in the approximately 10 meters high hall. It was very simple, but very monumental hall characterized by two large fireplaces facing each other and the powerful console cornice before the barrel ceiling covered the whole thing.
Eine Ausnehmung, ein Loch in der Decke. Und da schaute man nochmal hoch und schaute dann also letztgültig auf
The former church belonging to the castle was built between 1475 and 1508 by the Order of St. John and in the 17th century partly rebuilt. Since 1550, the newly admitted brothers became members of the Order by knighthood, which made them right knights of the Order of St. John. Very well known to this day for their wonderful star folds and these magnificent paintings, which about 100 years ago appeared again in restoration measures. We have their numerous coats of arms, also of Grand Masters, on the central axis, for example. After a devastating fire, the church tower was rebuilt in 1818, according to plans by Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Also noteworthy are the 6 stained glass windows with the coats of arms of the 92 knights who died during World War I, as well as the Baroque altar with altar pieces in alabaster and marble from the early second half of the 16th century. The magnificent altar comes from the Berlin castle.
Der ist dort 1600, weil man dort eine Kapelle umbaute.
Around 1600, because a chapel was rebuilt here, has been decommissioned and then via the waterways all the way here to Sonnenburg and then been erected here again. It also once again shows the close connection to the Order of St. John, which had the ruler's house to the Hohenzollern and its all personality sidelines that existed there. In addition to the castle, the most important legacy of Johann Moritz is the economic and social stability in the region, which provided an upswing and left room for something new.
Nach anderen Vorbildern haben die Johanniter hier
According to other models, the order ensured that the Wartburg was drained and that the Warta was divided here. They made sure that settlements were operated here and that a very large number of villages were built.
Dass eine ganz große Zahl von Dörfern hier errichtet wurden.
With the embankment of the Warta, which began in 1767, the Order of St. John under Prince August Ferdinand of Prussia created the conditions for sustainable settlement policy. In Sonnenburg Monastery alone, 100 square kilometers of the best arable land were won, and numerous colonies were founded in which settlers of different origins and religions lived and worked peacefully together. If you turn north into Ulrika-Choprina, about 200 meters west of the palace, and follow it for about 2 kilometers, you will find yourself in the middle of the Wartemündung National Park, a beautiful cultural and natural landscape that dates back to the draining in the 18th century. Due to its unusual form of village names such as Florida, Savannah, or Pennsylvania, it is also known as New America. Here, you will find historical pumping stations, small and large churches, as well as a lot of nature that you would like to explore by canoe or bicycle. If you continue from Wartburg towards the southeast, you will reach the Wargow region. Wargow is a municipality in Lubuskie Voivodeship surrounded by lakes and wooded hills. The eventful history of the town was determined by its strategic location on the former eastern border of the Holy Roman Empire and on the border area between Silesia, Greater Poland, and the Mark Brandenburg. Wargow Castle and its lands were built in the middle of the 14th century in the possession of the Order of St. John. With 19 villages and the former Templar estate Kostrzyn, with another 5 villages, Wargow was the largest commandery in the bailiwick of Brandenburg and had the highest income. This minting is still visible today. Wargow carries the St. John's Cross in the municipal coat of arms. Immediately after the acquisition, the expansion of Wargow Castle began, the establishment of a settlement and the fortification of the property with a fortification wall and 2 gates and towers each. In 1569, Wargow was granted town rights. The castle is located on a hill between Lake Wargow and Lake Chainau. Today, the castle is used as a hotel and a restaurant. The 24-meter-high castle tower offers an impressive panoramic view of the charming landscape. The adjoining park, with art sculptures and an open-air stage, invites you to linger. Today, St. John's Baptist Church was rebuilt in neoclassical style instead of a chapel built in 1536. Inside, 2 sandstone gravestones commemorate the first Protestant computer Andreas von Schlieben and his son. The small town has dedicated itself entirely to tourism. Numerous guest houses, hotels or campsite, as well as a wide range of restaurants, sports and leisure activities leave nothing to be desired. About 20 kilometers northeast of Wargow is the town of Kostrzyn. In 1244, the city became a part of the Templar Order. From 1315 to 1810, the village remained under the administration of the Order of St. John. Some buildings and the town's coat of arms still have the St. John's Cross in them. The St. John's House, built in 1536, is one of the oldest houses in the city. It was renovated in the 2010s with EU funds and supplemented by modern extension. It is a meeting place and a center for German-Polish cooperation. There's also a retirement home. Next to the house are the remains of the medieval city walls. The imposing St. Nicholas Church in Kostrzyn dates back to the 13th and 14th centuries. It was rebuilt after a devastating fire in 1945. Near Kostrzyn, the villages of Brezno and Ostrów, there are other two smaller former churches related to the history of the Order of St. John. Brezno is located about 4 kilometers southwest of Kostrzyn. The first mention of the church dates back to 1405. The interior is characterized by a pulpit altar, the wooden basin, and the paintings on a balustrade. The present form and execution of the church was built around 1774. Ostrów is located on the Highway 138. Here, with the Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, there is a beautiful brick church, first mentioned in 1443. The town of Świebodzin is located about 21 kilometers east of Warów. In the middle of the 14th century, the Duke of Silesia-Sejm pledged the castle and town of Świeboż with jurisdiction to the Order of St. John. The purchase was financed by the order from the sale of Tempelhof near Berlin. As a result, in the War of Succession, the Knights of St. John estate fell to the Bohemian crown in 1489, so that the Knights of John family had to give up Świeboż only after a few decades. A part of the southeast wing of the castle is preserved as a ruin. Świebodzin also carries the St. John's cross in the city coat of arms. Friedland is located west of the Oder River, about 8 kilometers south of Beeskow. The city was first mentioned in documents in 13,001. It was built at the intersection of the streets of Lieberose, Beeskow and Neuzelle under the protection of a moated castle which probably dates back to the Knights of Strehle. It retained the name Streleburg, Friedland to this day. There are 3 castles in the district, all 3 castles that once belonged to the Strehles. Therefore, the Streleburgen community: Storkow, Beeskow and Friedland. Storkow was burned down and rebuilt in the 60s with many millions of funds. Beeskow castle partially burned down in 1945, and our castle exists in the present dimensions and in the present building since 1658. The town and the castle with 14 surrounding villages were owned by the Order of St. John from 1518 to 1866. A devastating fire destroyed large parts of the town and the castle in 1623. Hardly rebuilt, the 30 Years' War broke out in the region. The Order of Friedland was occupied by the Swedes from 1643 to 1650, and the marauding troops left the Order of Friedland in ruins after the war. There were many or more fires in Friedland and the town of Friedland. There was also a fire here in the castle, in this tower of the original dwelling. It's said to have burned down, but I don't think the thick walls, which you can see behind me, burned down any time. Maybe it was the floors. Grandmaster Count Adam von Schwarzenberg ensured the reconstruction of the castle fortress until 1658 and supported the reconstruction in the region around Friedland. They worked here, they managed the lands, they were allowed to give gifts to officials. And we were Saxon territory, and the castle was then Sonnenburg and was located in Brandenburg, the Palais Brandenburg. And they moved a lot there. They also built a new residential tower in front, and they built the middle building about 1658 here in Friedland. With the secularization of 1866, the possession of the order finally passed the Kingdom of Saxony. Friedland Castle has survived the centuries and is today one of the best preserved castles in Brandenburg. It houses a German-Polish multimedia information and meeting center, of the shared history of Knights of St. John with the twin town of Kostrzyn. In 4 to 5 alternating exhibitions a year, a diverse range of paintings, ceramics, photography, experimental art and films on a wide range of subjects are shown on a high level. A varied event program for young and old completes a range of activities offered by the Streleburg in Friedland. Also in the commentary Friedland, the St. John's Cross has survived in some local coats of arms to this day. For example, in the former villages Mixdorf and Grunow-Dammdorf. Both villages also have small village churches which were built by the Order of St. John. The church in Mixdorf was built in 1719. The weather flag probably dates back to earlier times. It bears the letters BS for Bailiwick Sonnenburg and the year 1606. The double eagle indicates that Lower Lusatia formerly belonged to Bohemia and stood under the Austrian double eagle of the Habsburgs. In the tower, there are 3 bells from the middle of the 16th century, as well as from 1588 and 1596. The church in Grunow, on the other hand, was built only in 1773 with a rectangular half-timbered building with a west roof tower. Further renovations took place in the 60s and 90s. The interior has encircling galleries and a ditch ceiling. The church also houses an altar, fragments of a wooden baptismal angel, a crucifixion group, and a baptismal font from the time of the order. Around the district of Seelow, you can also discover many traces of history. The commandery Lietzen, first mentioned as a Templar property in 1244, was taken over by the Knights of St. John in 1318. The village of Lietzen is located on the L37 southwest of Seelow. But the whole thing actually goes back not only to the Knights of St. John, but also to the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were the first to establish an estate here, and this goes back to 1229. Around 1312, the possession passed to the Order of St. John. The surrounding villages of Lietzen, Heinersdorf, Tempelberg, Marksdorf, Neuentempel, Deugelin, Gorgast and Werbeck had to pay taxes to the commandery. There are also 2 more interesting churches from the Templar era. Marksdorf is located 4 kilometers west of Lietzen. The church is essentially a field store building from that time. The St. John's Cross on the facade above the entrance bears witness to the subsequent presence of the Order of St. John until 1810. Also worth seeing is the church Neuentempel, 4 kilometers from Marksdorf in the direction of Seelow. Neuentempel was first mentioned in 1247. The church is a fieldstone building from that time. The 2 original church bells still ring today. The current ensemble on the commandery Lietzen comprises the Templar Church, the Manor House, and a historical storehouse. It is a unique testimony of the Order's 500-year history. It is privately owned by the Counts of Hardenberg, who also live in a manor house built around 1619 and manage the commandery. The old church here in Lietzen is still reminiscent of the Order of St. John in many places. Behind me is the altar, which is in the church, and we have there 2 figures, on one side Moses, on the other side St. John. There we have again a reference to the Order of St. John as the Order. The manor house emerged from the former convention building, the dormitory of the Order. The 13th century storage building is one of the oldest storage buildings of this kind in Europe.
Was wir hier im Inneren sehen, das ist
See
eine große
inside, there's
Balkenkonstruktion,
just a
die
large
dann in späteren
construction which
Jahrhunderten
was
eingezogen
moved
wurde,
later
aber
centuries,
mittlerweile
but
auch
has
einige
now been in
Jahrhunderte,
existence for several
schon,
centuries.
besteht.
Altogether, this building
Insgesamt
has
ist das
4
Gebäude
stories.
viergeschossig,
Today,
ist
it's
heute
a
eine
small
kleine museale
museum
Nutzung
and a very
und
special
in
rarity
dieser
in
Weise
Brandenburg.
eine ganz besondere Rarität in Brandenburg.
After the defeat of Prussia against Napoleon in 1806, and with the Prussian secularization in 1812, the large landed property of the Order of St. John was dissolved and transferred to the Kingdom of Prussia.
Das Oberhaupt
The head
des,
of the order was one of the
Johanniterordens war
royal
ohnehin
family
einer
anyway,
aus der
and then they
königlichen
came to an
Familie.
agreement and
Dann hat man
practically
sich geeinigt und
nationalized
hat
the large
quasi
property
das-
of
den
Brandenburg,
Großgrundbesitz der
and
Ballei
for example,
Brandenburg, also
all
des
of the
hiesigen
property of the Knights of St. John.
Johanniterbesitzes verstaatlicht.
Thus, the commandery Lietzen fell to the Prussian crown. However, it was donated by Friedrich Wilhelm III in 1814 to Chancellor Karl August Fürst von Hardenberg for his great services to the reclamation of the Prussian state, as well as Quilitz, today's Neuhardenberg, with an eponymous castle.
Auch wenn der
Even
Name
if
es
the
vermuten
name
lässt,
suggests that this
der
all
ganze Besitz dieses
belongs
Haus
to the
gehört heute nicht mehr
Hardenbergs,
den
they no
Grafen von
longer
Hardenberg.
possess it.
Die
The
Familie
family
hat sich
decided to
entschieden,
sell it
vor etwa
about 20
20
years
Jahren
ago.
das alles,
Today, it
zu
is a
verkaufen. Es ist
foundation,
heute
a
eine
cultural
Stiftung, eine
foundation.
Kulturstiftung,
It's a
ist
public
ein
place
öffentlicher Ort,
and
der
it's
zugänglich
open
ist.
for everyone. Castle Neuhardenberg now houses a hotel with a beautiful park designed by Karl Friedrich Schinke. The hotel also has a museum and offers numerous cultural events throughout the year. The last owner was Knight Count Karl Hans von Hardenberg, who, from Neuhardenberg Castle, co-organized the Hitler assassination attempt of July 20, 1944, which failed. He was an opponent of the Nazis from the very beginning. He was also active here as a local politician in the region, but then decided to resign from all posts in order not to be taken over by the new regime. On July 24th, the Gestapo arrived at Castle Neuhardenberg and arrested the Count, who had previously failed to commit suicide. He was also deported to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The Red Army liberated the camp before his death sentence could be carried out. From 1948 to 1958, Count von Hardenberg was commander of the Brandenburg Provincial Cooperative of the Order of St. John and wrote down his experiences. Von Hardenberg had certainly gone into resistance because of his Christian convictions then. After surviving the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, he described it as a miracle of God, and later on in West Germany, he was able to work for the Knights of John again. The properties in Lietzen and Neuhardenberg were confiscated by the Nazis and divided up after 1945 in the course of the socialist land reform. Since 1993, the commandery Lietzen has been in Hardenberg's possession again. The church is an open church and is open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Visitors are asked to stay on official roads, pay attention to signs, and respect the private use of all residents. The history of the Order of St. John is fascinating and touches on many epochs and historical events. Even during World War I, the Knights of St. John distinguished themselves by their strong commitment to organized care for the sick and disabled. The Second World War brought persecution and death for 9 knights in resistance. With the end of the war, the Oder-Warta region was divided in the course of the westward shift of Poland, and former monasteries east of the Oder became difficult to reach. In addition, almost all Protestant churches in the People's Republic of Poland were expropriated and converted into Catholic churches.
Nach 1945 haben sie sich in
In 1945, they rebuilt themselves in West Germany and again became a very well-known and very successful nursing organization.
Einer Krankenpflegeorganisation geworden.
According to the double commandment of love, you shall love God with all your heart and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The Order of St. John stands for charitable, humanitarian work with people in healthcare, in the medical service, and with charitable services. With its plants and facilities, the Order of St. John are a globally active community of around 19,000 employees. The bailiwick of Brandenburg is divided into 22 common commissions or cooperatives, including 5 non-German common commissions. Among the extensive tasks of the largest religion organization, the St. John Accident Assistance are the rescue and medical service, civil protection, first aid training, the care of sick and elderly people. Its members provide humanitarian aid in the event of a famine or natural disasters around the world. And then there's also the disaster operation, where service from Germany, for example, fly to earthquake areas with train tracking dogs looking for buried people. So this is where the Knights of St. John are still very active today. Promoting young people and giving them the best possible start in life is a special concern of the Order. After 1990, daycare centers and child and youth welfare institutions have found a firm place in our society. Thanks to the various support of the Order, the school location of Wriezen received new impulses with the foundation of the Protestant schools. It combines Christian educational traditions and vocational training. If I want to understand the present, I have to understand the past. And if you're interested in the Order of St. John or the St. John's family as a whole, I can only recommend that you go where you can still see the traces of the St. John. In 2019, the municipality of Śląsk, together with its partners, the city of Zelo and the Brandenburg Provincial Cooperative of the Order of St. John, launched an EU funding project to promote the history of St. John in the region.
Mamy inne walory turystyczne. Niedawno powstało Muzeum Przyrody, jest Park Narodowy Ujście Warty, jest Muzeum Martyrologii. Także ten obiekt włączamy cały szlak turystyczny i myślę, że to będzie jedna z perełek Śląska.
In cross-border cooperation, a total of 19 sites in the Oder-Warta region were identified. Today, it is connected by a tourist circuit which is divided into 4 sections: Zelo, Śląsk, Łagów and Friedland. Follow the traces of the Order of St. John and enjoy nature and history in the region. Discover towns and villages, legendary castles or historic churches. Visit the castle ruins in Śląsk and use digital instruments to revive the splendor of bygone times. You can go through it, you can turn around in it. Many people already know it, and it's innovative, modern. It appeals to young people, and that's exactly what we want. We want to communicate history in a modern way, and this is why we created this project. The new permanent exhibition at and in Sonnenburg Castle is multilingual and leaves little to be desired, with many interactive elements. In addition, a permanent exhibition is also interactive and barrier-free, so especially for visually impaired people, there are many tactic stations in the permanent exhibition so that visually impaired and blind people can understand what they're looking at here. The app is another building block for this. There also will be audio files for visually impaired people and various other aids also in plain language. That's the history of the Order, and also the castle here as a new tourist center will bring joy to many visitors. Celebrate the St. Moritzfest in Śląsk or one of many other St. John's feasts in the region. Make a pilgrimage to Templar and St. John's churches and learn more about the exciting history of the knightly order, embedded in the wonderful German-Polish natural and cultural landscape of the Oder-Warta region.